Hey guys, Ronnie here. Something I've been thinking about, and some of you guys have asked about, is basically my testimony. There's been people who have watched this channel, viewed this channel, and have said, Ronnie, share your testimony, how you got saved and things like that. And I've been thinking about doing just that because I do have a kind of neat story. It's not very unique in the sense that, God saved a lot of people like me, and I've heard similar testimonies to mine. But, for those of you guys who want to know, I'll tell you kind of what happened. But it's going to be in a multi-part video because, not only do I want to talk about like how I got saved, but there's a great deal of things that God has done in my life since then. And I think in order to give a complete testimony, we don't need to focus solely on our life before we got saved. Now, I know that's not common. Generally speaking, when you give a testimony in church, especially when you were someone like me before I was born again, people like to focus on how bad they were. Everybody wants to, before I was saved, I killed people and ate them. Because the worse you are, the better the testimony. But I don't want to focus on a lot of that because, you know what? The devil got enough credit from my life without me having to go through and rehash a bunch of that. But I'll just give you this much about my past. We'll begin in a jail cell, cell block B. I believe the cell number was 4. I believe it was B4. I actually have the Bible that I got when I was in jail. I still have it. My wife actually has it as a bit of a decoration in a room in our home. And I know, right? But it is. I'm glad she did that because for me, this Bible is like the beginning. This is where it started. In the last video I did, I told you a little bit about my life, but I was sitting in a jail cell and I got arrested on a Friday night for just some very stupid things. And I picked up a charge for, when I got arrested, they found some pot on me. And so I was arrested for weed. I was arrested for, because I was very prideful, very arrogant. And this police officer said something to me out of the way. And it was out of the way. He really had no business saying what he said. And I invited him to take his gun and his badge off and lay it on the hood of his car and come and prove to me that he could back up the threat that he had made. And he didn't. But what he did do was show up at my house later that night with about a whole nother squad. And they took me to jail. Anyway, long story short, I'm sitting in jail from Friday night to Sunday morning, and ironically, let me backtrack just a little bit. Before that, I've always been a big fan of motorcycles. I love motorcycles, any kind of motorcycles. I've always been a big fan of two wheels. And I'm outside at my house one day, and it's like I don't know, probably maybe a Sunday afternoon. I had this black lady that was a neighbor of mine, and she was a believer, and she was one of those preachy, annoying. When you're a lost man, anybody preaches to you is annoying. She was one of those type, And she would always come over and, honey, I want to talk to you about the Lord. And when I was lost, I didn't want to hear it. I did not want to hear it. I mean, it was like, in my mind, there was no reason for me to hear it. I wasn't a Christian. I couldn't be a Christian because I'd already done so many bad things. I mean, I was already a fairly heavy drinker. I liked smoking pot. I had done some other drugs. I was living with someone I wasn't married to. I just I wasn't a good person, and I don't say I like to fight, but but I sure didn't try to avoid it very much. So I thought there's no reason for me to listen to that. I mean, in order to be a Christian, in my mind, you had to be born that way. You had to be raised. You were raised in a church, and you were good all your life. And I was past that point. There was, you know, I thought to me that I was past this point of no return. But I do remember sitting and talking with a buddy of mine. We were sitting in my backyard. We were having beer one day, and we were just sitting there drinking a beer. And I remember saying to him, I said, you know, man, I wish that I could travel back in time, or that my life had something like a light switch, you know, where you could just hit the switch and start over again. You know, just go back to before you started doing stupid stuff and just start over with the knowledge that you have now. I wish life had something like that. And little did I know, life does have something like that, and his name is Jesus, but I didn't know that at the time. But anyway, this lady came over and she was witnessing to me, and I was sitting on my motorcycle and I was working, and I had my beer beside me, probably had the stereo, you know, blasting some 80s heavy metal rock and roll music. And she come over and she started preaching to me, and I'd had enough. I mean, I really had had it. She'd been over there before, and I'd asked her nicely. And I picked up a wrench, and I said, lady, if you ever come over here again, I'm going to hit you with this wrench. And I showed it to her, you know, and she was just as nice as she could be. She said, one of these days, the Lord's going to put you in a position where you're going to want to listen. About 3 days later, I'm sitting in a jail cell, and they came around and said, all right, they got a Sunday morning church service. Do you guys want to go? And I'm like, I didn't want to go, but the only option was to sit in that little 8x10 cell. And I figured, well, heck, at least if I get out of here and go listen to a church service, I can get out of the cell for, you know, a little while. And to be honest with you, in jail, all you have to do is sit around and contemplate and think about your life and think about the choices you made. And I realized that I was making some pretty foolish choices, some very stupid choices in my life at that time. And I thought, you know, what could it hurt? I'll go listen to this guy preach. And he came into this jail cell, and I remember distinctly to this day, the guy had long hair like I did. He had a ponytail, and he had a NHRA belt buckle on, the National Hot Rod Association. And I thought, you know what? I had long hair. I had a ponytail, long ponytail, longer than that preacher's. He had a little short, you know, Cy Robertson type ponytail. And me, I had a, you know, lead singer of Motley Crue ponytail. Anyway, I thought, this guy don't look like most of the preachers I've seen. You know, the clean-cut little box haircut, preacher boys, clean-shaven, you know, wearing the three-piece monkey suit and all that stuff. And I was just, that was not me at all. You know, I was, that was not me at all. So I'm like, I got to go hear what this guy's got to say, just because of the way he looks, because he looks kind of like me. He don't look like most of them other very judgmental Christians that sermons always started with, you need to get a haircut, boy. So I went down and I listened. As this preacher began to speak, he told me my life story, right down to the very things that I was thinking and doing when I got arrested. And it scared, it was scary, because I knew that man didn't know me. And so maybe God is speaking to me through him. That was my thoughts. And as he began to tell me my life story, my question was, is there any hope for me? Is there any hope for me? And then this preacher said, when he got saved, he was a prisoner. He was doing time in jail, just like I was, and God saved him and turned his life around. Now he had my attention. Because you see, I didn't understand that Christianity was like that. And then he told me something else I didn't know. He said most of the guys that were considered to be Bible heroes were at one time had done some horrible things. He said there was a man who had committed murder that God used to give the God's law to, and there was a guy who had even killed Christians. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if God could redeem those kind of people, I haven't killed anybody yet. Maybe. But it affected me so much that how much of my very thoughts this guy was able to say. And it shook me. And I got up because I was about to break, man. I was literally about to break. So I got up to leave because, you know, you don't want to break down in jail. When you're in jail, you don't want to be in there, you know, crying and stuff like that. You don't show signs of weakness and signs of being, you know, a baby. So I got up to leave because I knew, man, this is, I can't sit here no more. And as I got up to leave, the preacher stopped me. He said, young man, hold on a second. Come here for a minute. Can I give you something? I walked up and I'm, you know, like, yeah, okay, you know, and I wouldn't make eye contact with him. And I looked down and he wrote the cell block number in a Bible and he gave it to me. I still have that Bible. And I left, I went back to my cell and I began to read through some of he gave me a couple gospel tracts and I began to read through them. And, you know, it planted a seed in my mind that maybe I haven't gone past the point of redemption. That maybe God could take a young man who's sitting in sitting in jail for drugs, sitting in jail for threatening to fight a police officer, sitting in jail for just being an idiot. Maybe God could turn my life around if he could use a murderer to write some of the Bible. And I just remember sitting in my jail cell contemplating that. And then shortly after that, I got word that I was being bonded out. Now, I got bonded out. I got out of jail, you know, and I had that jailhouse religion that people have for a couple of days, you know, where you don't want to drink, you don't want to smoke pot, you don't want to do that kind of stuff, you know. But then slowly, them old buddies start coming around, you know, and all that stuff there, you know, ended up going to court, and most of my charges were dropped. You know, I ended up paying like a fine, and that was it. So it was like there was no real punishment, and my life just kind of went back. But that seed had been planted, and because I wouldn't listen to this black lady who come over to witness to me, God said, he did exactly what she said he would do. He put me in a place where I didn't have no choice but to listen, and he pulled me away from the crowd, isolated me off to myself, and began the seed that would later become the gospel. Now, this happened over many, many months. And in time, it really came to a point. Now, I'm not talking about, God had me under conviction of sin beginning at the point where I was in jail, maybe before that even. I hated my life. I didn't like how my life was, but I didn't know how to change it. And I figured even if I did change it, there's no way to go back and undo some of the things I'd already done. And, you know, so the Lord began to work on me in that jail cell. And he planted again that idea that there are people who have been changed. I had a friend of mine that sent me a picture. This buddy of mine was actually a musician. He used to play in a band too. And he sent me this picture, and I remember the picture was of a restored car. It was like a 57 Chevrolet. It had been completely restored, and it was this beautiful car. And, you know, like most guys, I liked hot rods and fast cars. And at the bottom of this picture, this fully restored and looks, you know, good as new 57 Chevrolet, it said, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. My apologies. I hope I paused this. I needed a moment. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. The old has passed away. Behold, all things are new. And that picture, I remember staring at it for a long time, thinking, I wish. And I just remember thinking, oh man, I wish. Lord, could you do that for me? And as I lived for a great deal of time thinking about these things, never really talking to anyone about how I felt, God brought a dear friend of mine back into my life. This guy, he and I had been friends together. We both played, we were both musicians. We both played in bands. And he had moved away, and God brought him back into my life. And when I met him again, there was a joy, and there was something to him that really got my attention. And he began to come over to my house. He began to hang out with me, and he would always talk with me about the Lord. Now, he was never pushy. He was never judgmental. But he had a presence about him that was so convicting to me that when he was at my house, sometimes I would wish he'd hurry up and leave because I'd have cold beer in the freezer or in the refrigerator, and I wanted to drink it, but I just wouldn't do it in front of him. He had a presence that was very convicting, and I'd be thinking, man, I'm going to smoke a joint as soon as he leaves. But I loved the presence that he had. But my sin nature couldn't wait to, go back to indulging in my, in my pot smoking and my alcohol. Even though I wanted to change, I hadn't changed yet. I was still who I was. I still did what I did. But there was something about him, and I thought, man, he's changed. I wish I was like that. But it was impossible. It was physically impossible because unbeknownst to me at that time, I was dead. I was dead in my sin, and I could not help myself. But I remember seeing that picture. If any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things have passed away, and all things become new. And for a great deal of time, I spent listening to the words of these people, looking at these pictures, and just longing and wishing that maybe, if there was a God, he was taking notice of me. And maybe one day he would help me to become new.